So I want to say thank you everyone who joined us today. We're really glad you're here. Radha Pandey, she runs Halden Bookworks with Johan Solberg, and she's also a member of the Book Print Artist Scholar of Color Collective, which is how we got introduced to her. And I have to admit, I've been fangirling about all of her work. It's absolutely stunning. She is a papermaker and letterpress printer. She earned her MFA in book arts from the University of Iowa Center for Book, which I'm seeing some other students and graduates from there already joined us today. And she was a recipient of the Iowa Arts Fellowship there. She has learned European, Eastern, and Indo-Islamic papermaking techniques with Timothy Barrett and teaches book arts classes in India, Europe, and the United States. Her artist books are held in over 40 public and private collections internationally, including the Library of Congress and Yale University. Really, really stunning work. She studied with some amazing instructors, and she uses that knowledge that she has to make visually interesting and pieces that really tell a story. So Radha, I want to say thank you so much for being here today. I will hand it over and I'll let you share more. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks all of you for being here and taking the time. And thanks Hamilton Woodtype Museum for allowing people from all over to have a platform. So I'm going to begin with showing you slides, and then I'm going to transition to showing you actual books. You can choose which books you'd like to see. And I'd apologize in advance for speaking so low, but I bit my mouth and it's a little bit difficult to talk. I'd like to begin by talking about the environment. The man-made, natural, physical, and psychological environments and how their presence affects the work that I make, and that affects how I perceive the world around me. So some of you might know I'm from Delhi in India. I didn't grow up here, but this is where I went to buy papers, whatever I needed papers to do anything. And they would only have the 3 standard varieties of really horrible, terribly made paper that was bad quality. And so for anything else, I had to go to this marketplace in the old part of the city. And so buying something very simple like paper became really difficult. My mother brought back kozo from Japan when I was 5. And that was a huge influence on me. It completely changed the way that I was thinking about paper. I didn't know before that paper could be translucent. And the other big influence was Auroville papers in South India, which is where this picture was taken. So I knew that I wanted to work with paper in some way. So when I found out about these book arts programs, I applied to all of them. And when I got into Iowa, I moved from this situation to this kind of situation, which was a huge, drastic shift psychologically, physically, of course. But also there was just so much space and no people. And so it gave me a lot of time to think, be a little more introspective. And that's resulted in a number of projects, which I'm going to talk about now. So I was thinking about the difference in time. And I came up with this book called Glimpses, which is a series of French folds. And each French fold is divided into 2 sections. And each of these sections represent 2 different time zones. So I spent a lot of my time thinking about what my family was up to when I was sleeping and what I was up to when they were sleeping. And all of these illustrations were done on kozo and then cut out and then pasted on a base sheet. This book is called Taking Stock. And I was literally taking stock of everything that I owned after 1 year of being in Iowa. So I'd moved with 1 suitcase, but at the end of that year, I had like half a house full of stuff. And so this was also one of the first things that I letterpress printed. And I categorized everything according to the material that was used to make it. This book is called Peeping Tom, and it's kind of a rumination on the buildings, the apartment buildings in Delhi that I would see from my car window when I was stuck in traffic, and look into all these people's homes and look into these apartments and see these various like vignettes. And so it's a 3-panel accordion, and each panel is a origami tessellation. And so the base sheet has been printed, letterpress printed, but all the little images are stenciled. This book is called Abies Spectabilis, and it was made in 2012, and it's one of the first books for which I made all the paper as well. And it's an exploration of the East Himalayan fir. It's a tree that grows in India, Afghanistan, China, and Nepal. And so I remember going to this little mountain town in Manali in North India and sitting in this small pocket of fir in the middle of this busy city. And I ended up spending the whole day there and doing a lot of writing and drawing. And the end result was this book. And it was a little bit of me trying to bring back that sense of home and comfort into this other place where I now lived. So this spread is something I consider the heart of the book, and it contains text that I wrote while I was in the woods and then opens out to a larger text spread of a drawing that I did while I was there too. But I couldn't get the kind of depth that I was hoping for. And so I decided to take this illustration and simplify it and turn it into a tunnel book to get that depth and that light. And so the paper for the trees is kozo that I made, and the frames are abaca or hemp, one of the two. The back panel is waxed kozo, and so it allows this like diffuse light to come through, and you can also see the entire book from the back. So changing tracks a little bit. So this picture was taken a few minutes after all the birds flew off the treetops. It was a good sort of reminder to not be in the moment and stop trying to fiddle with the phone to get a picture. So I decided to try to illustrate that in a cutout. And so this was the cutout. But again, it was so static and so flat. So I decided to turn it into a watermark. And some of you may know already, but a watermark is made when there's something that's obstructing the drainage of the pulp on a mold surface. So wherever this like white plastic was, there was lesser pulp there because the pulp drainage was being obstructed. So when you have a finished sheet, all those thinner areas allow more light to come through, and all those thicker areas allow less light to come through, just like in your banknote. So I made a number of these sheets, about 150, and I decided to turn it into an animation. It's going to play a few times because it's only 4 seconds. But like I said, it's 150 sheets of paper, give or take, and 6 months of my life. So around the same time, I was working on my thesis work, and that animation did become part of my thesis work. So for it, I decided to make paper made from hemp and cotton for a book that was called Anatomia Botanica, and it took inspiration from books made in the 16th century, and that's why I chose that combination of paper as well. So I made around 400 sheets of paper to make the deluxe edition, and the book is about 3 species of flowering plants that were around me when I was growing up that inspired me. So one of them is a southern magnolia, and the illustrations were inspired by 16th to 18th century European and American botanicals that I'd seen in the special collections at Iowa. as well as 16th century books of anatomy that allowed the reader to go through something like all the organs to learn. So I applied that to these illustrations. I find this one particularly weird because the man looks like he's alive and sniffing that fruit, yet we're able to peek through his brain. So in the same way, you can kind of peek through these flowers. So this particular print is about 16 colors. It's linoleum reduction. And so the movable pieces are printed separately and then inserted in to the base print. This one is the hibiscus. So this book and the research about all that taxonomy and the history of taxonomy was a bridge to my next book called Taxonomy of Shapes, which I completed at the Women's Studio Workshop in my largest edition so far of 52. And it's the taxonomy of the circle, the square, and the triangle. And so when you open it, you have these three shapes cut out, and then you see them printed. And then you come to the key of 60 random sort of objects from the natural world and the man-made world. And then you have overlays of the circle, the square, and the triangle that highlight this taxonomy of the circle, the square, and the triangle. So I'm basically trying to question this whole system of taxonomical classification. Why do we need to fit everything into a neat little grid when everything around us is constantly evolving and changing in the natural world? So it's almost as ridiculous as saying we can just categorize everything to its geometric shape. Why not? So the book is bound in an accordion, a pull-out accordion format, like that. So what I enjoy most about book arts is the control that I can exercise over my materials and process. And one of those processes is papermaking and the history of papermaking. And so one of the things that interests me is the history of papermaking in India and how that paper in the Indo-Islamic tradition was made specifically for calligraphy and how to prepare for calligraphy. So I decided to collaborate with a calligrapher, Cheryl Jacobson at Iowa. And I made all the paper for her and then sent the paper over to her. And she took the lost and found section, found recovered section from the local newspaper and decided to write it through the pages. And then she sent the pages back to me and I bound the book. So the other aspect of paper that I love is naturally dyed papers and how they were dyed historically. And so learning more about that led to a project, but I made a lot of mistakes on the way. So just, kind of experimenting with dyeing and over dyeing and what works and what doesn't. You learn a lot. And one of those books was Deep Time. So for this book, I dyed all the paper using cloves and then dipped it in indigo. And this book, it looks really big, but it's about the size of my palm, my hand. So the book is about sedimentation and erosion and the action of water and soil on our planet and how they have shaped the highest points on our planet, namely the Tibetan Plateau, the Andean Mountain Range, and the Kanzagel Range in East China. And so these shapes are those highest points. And as you go through the book, the indigo kind of increases and takes over. And the topography, the printed maps, topographical maps also change. Those are wood engravings. And there are 15 different wood engravings. And that ends on a text spread that kind of talks about what I've just said. So actually thinking about time and accumulation and extraction made me think about snowmelt and icicles and that constant ongoing process And I was thinking about how to represent that. And I had been working at the Morgan Conservatory, and I was making this paper for a project, and I thought that this would be the perfect representation of that. So I decided to use this beautiful Abaca paper for a book called Memory of Long Ago. So the book is entirely white. It has no images, and it's about the color white. And I'll just read out a little bit paraphrased from my colophon. Breast milk, semen, and snow were perhaps our first encounters with white. But what if snow had fallen orange or black? How would our early perceptions of life, creation, and reverence of nature affect our notions of virginity, race, purity, and beauty? White would no longer seem clean. Hospital and gallery walls may no longer be painted white. In fact, maybe our toothpaste would not be white or detergent. Memory of Long Ago has been made using highly beaten abaca fibers that were letterpress printed using Johanna types. Papers were waxed and bound to resemble an ice core. Layers of frozen water or fern hold our planet's memories from long ago. So the text that I used has been taken with permission from Kenya Hara, who wrote a book called White. And depending on how you look at it, you can have multiple readings of the text because of the way it's been printed. And you can read with difficulty all the text at the same time if it's backlit. All right, so my latest book, I finished it in 2018, so not really recent. It's called Algal Fungal, and it's about these 3 species of lichen that I found on this one little stick at Penland. It's about the size of my palm, and so this first print is to scale. I used wood engravings to make all the illustrations, and I wanted the lichen to appear like it's growing on or off the pages. And so each of these illustrations is comprised of multiple blocks. This was a color test I was running, so I learned a lot about the representation of color. Yeah, just how odd it is to try to represent something natural and make it look real. Try to make it look real. It doesn't, it never look as close to the real things. So this is another series of blocks that I used to print this type of lichen that I've seen on coastal rocks a lot here in Norway, although they're much more orange here. So that brings me to what I'm currently working on, which is a book of floral portraiture in the Mughal miniature tradition. So the Mughal period, you can kind of say it's like the medieval period. So it's the period before the British came. And how this floral portraiture and that aesthetic was really impacted by colonial interests and the commercialization of plants. So I'm kind of going back to this like awe that I had with these botanicals and looking at them a little more critically because the book addresses how the existing Indian culture of painting as appreciation of natural beauty became secondary and was kind of overrun by the European scientific aesthetic, which is on the right. And so one was done purely for joy and the other one was done in a kind of insidious way for like propagation of plants and the colonization of plants. So the paper that I plan to use will be made traditionally using raw hemp papers with a little bit of recycled paper as well. And I'll be collaborating with the paper makers in India who make paper the way it was made in the 14th century or pretty close. And all of the illustrations will be wood engravings. And they'll be done, almost finished. And then I'll be sending them to a miniature painter that I'm in touch with in Delhi. And he'll complete it as he sees fit. So I wanted to combine this traditional and slightly more modern and see what happens. The layouts for all of the images, I've kind of followed the same grid pattern as you would find in an Indo-Islamic manuscript. And that's on one side, so that's on the right side of the book. And then the left side of the book opens out in this almost the same way, but it has more fold outs and it has text. Most of the text is on this side too. So it's kind of a conversation piece between a book that opens left to right and one that opens right to left. And that interaction will hopefully bring more attention to what I'm trying to say. The text will be in English, Hindi, and Urdu, all three. And I'm still trying to work out the typography for that. Yeah, that was all. Thank you.
Yeah, that was really stunning.
If anybody has questions, I'm happy to take them now. Or if anybody would like to see any of the books, I have some of them here and I can show them.
I know we'd love to see the books. There were a couple of little questions, and I know we've got kind of some time built in. One of the questions was, are your books available? Because they're stunning. Is there a possibility to purchase them?
Yeah, you can purchase them through my website. So I can type it in.
I got it. You keep going. It's fine.
Yeah, radhapandey.com/shop. And then you'll be prompted for a password, and the password is purchase.
That is good to know. And also, when you do your works, about how many are normally in an edition? Like how large are the editions?
It really depends on the project. So it depends on how much work I have to do to actually finish it. So for example, Deep Time, for which I was cutting all of those pieces, I thought 35 would be like a pretty good number. So I went with 35, but actually it was a horrendously big number. So I kind of regretted it at the end because the box was also pretty jobby. And then I only finished cutting all of them just a month ago.
Oh, wow.
So that took an extra. I mean, I wasn't working on it every day, but it just took such a long time to actually make it. But that was also the whole point of the book, to make someone, when they're going through it, to make you think about the kind of time it might have taken the person to make this, and then think about that relative to Earth time or geologic time.
Great. There's a question from Barb, and she's asking, are you living in Norway? And if so, how has this influenced your work?
I am living in Norway, and it is influencing the way I'm thinking about my work, about what I could be working on or what I would want to be working on. So Norway is pretty high up, and there's a lot of, you can get to a glacier pretty quickly from a town sometimes. And you can walk up to it too, because it's not that high in that way. Like you don't have to trek high up to get to the mountains. And so there's a lot of flora around that's specific to high altitude. You know, it's like specific to the high altitude. And you wouldn't necessarily see it, at least for me, in a place like India, unless you were to go pretty high up in the mountains. And so I find that really fascinating because there are plants and trees and everything that we have in a lower latitude, like where I am now, except they're much, much smaller. So the flowers are like smaller than the nail on my pinky, but everything is complete and right there. So I've just been thinking a lot about the scale of things, and how vast an area can be, but still cater to the needs of the animals that live in that area.
You have inspired many more questions. So do you mind if we ask a couple more before you show?
Oh yeah, of course.
Great. So Tom wants to know, do you have Hindi metal type or other type to use on the letterpress? Like, what are your supplies that you have there?
Over here, I only have English and Norwegian. I've been trying to look for Hindi metal type, but the people that I've reached out to don't know either, and those are people working in type in India. So unfortunately, I really don't want to do it, but I may have to use polymer. But I'm still looking, so I haven't settled on that yet.
Okay, well, this is a good group. So also, Now that it's been said here, if anybody has any thoughts, please reach out, because that way we can maybe help solve that mystery.
Yeah, and if anybody knows if I can find type in Urdu too, that would be really helpful.
Okay, you've heard it here, ham hang people. So when, here's a dyeing the paper question. When natural dyeing the paper, how is it for fastness and acceptance of inks or paint? Does it change? Do you have to add a mordant? They said they've never done paper, just yarn, and was curious about the difference. That's a good question.
So it's pretty different because, well, just like dyeing fabric, different types of paper will take dye differently. So you'll get like really great results with Japanese kozo or gampi, but not so great results with cotton. And so the paper I chose for deep dye is kozo because it takes the dye the best. If I could afford it, I would have probably chosen gampi, but it's so much more expensive. And you do need a mordant with some dyes for sure. Clove is a tannin, so I didn't need a mordant. And indigo is a vat dye, doesn't need a mordant. So that I made those choices based on that. Because when you apply a mordant, it changes the characteristic of the paper a little bit, especially if you're going to work with iron, and it makes the paper a lot more rough and brittle. I had done this broadside of the Shakespeare sonnet for that Bodleian project some years ago, and I had dyed the paper in onion and iron to get a gray, and it made the paper very difficult to work with when I went to print on it. So I had to burnish everything first, and then it printed much, much better. It became more pliable.
I noticed when I was looking through your work, it seems like you do a lot of research also as you do your projects. And so the knowledge you have of all the breadth of it is really amazing. There's a question about how many flowers do you plan to have in your book with the miniatures?
I am planning on 9, and I've chosen them based on the plants that weren't good enough to be colonized. So I'm choosing them based on the fact that they have no commercial value to the British.
Yeah.
So you don't normally see them out around in the world in other places, just in India.
Let's see. Someone also said, have you thought of doing light boxes for some of your books, especially with all the transparency that you use?
No, I haven't actually. The only thing that comes close is that tunnel book. And yeah, I haven't thought about that.
And then I was curious about this one as well. They want to know, Kyle wants to know, how is working with Johan to build Halden Bookworks affected your artistic practice? They also say hi.
Hi, Kyle. Well, at the moment, I have been only able to print here at home on this press, not at the studio. It's been too cold. We don't have heating in the outer studio space. But it's affected my practice in the sense that I'm thinking more about the making of things and the practicality. So it's like very different when you have a blank slate and you can design everything from scratch. So I'm really thinking about how I use the space a lot more and what would be convenient, where should things go. And the studio is also open to the public. So I'm also thinking about, these are the things that people might want to have, not things that I might not necessarily use myself, but maybe we should have this because some people might use it. So yeah, in that way, I think I've become more sort of thoughtful about physical spaces as well as how they affect the work that I'm making.
Yeah. Is it application based, or how is the access to the Bookworks run?
Yeah, so we hope to have a residency program that the application opens in October this year for the following year. And other than that, people can rent time if they happen to be in Norway, or if you're local in Norway and want to rent time, you can rent time.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think it is a good time to show your books. We've gotten through a lot of the questions. You showed me what books you're going to share. Someone was interested in seeing the apartments with all the windows, but I don't know if that was one you had out. So
I
figured
don't, that one's, sorry, that one's sitting in India.
No, I think that's a good excuse. we can't show that book, it's sitting in India, so that's no problem. I figured I would ask, so.
Right. Okay, any other requests?
Oh yeah, she did mention earlier, if you have any other requests to see, I'm gonna spotlight her so we can see her easily.
I'm just gonna put my cutting mat down so I get the focus back.
There we go, that looks focused.
Oh wow, you can actually see the, I made a dent into my cutting mat. Does it look familiar? The shape.
And
So,
that's a good question. Are those all hand cut?
yeah, those are hand cut. So
Wow.
let's see if I can get the right light there. I'll just go through this. So as we go through the book, we're sedimenting on one side and eroding on the other side. So I'm trying to make people aware too of the part they play in erosion and sedimentation today. And the topography is from the area around Mount Everest. And it gets tighter and tighter as you get higher and higher. Bring it a bit closer. The sad thing about, like by the time I got to the 15th block, I was using so much more of the block. So I was using a lot more time. And I was also getting better at making these lines and carving out the middle, but you can hardly see it because the color gets darker and darker. So then it ends on a text spread and the color farm.
There were a couple questions about that one.
Yeah.
One is the line above the indigo a tide line created with the clove dye?
Yeah, that's a tide line. And the color of that line is something that I really worked on to get that exact color. So if I'd done 2 layers of clove dye, I would get a different kind of brown there. And if I'd use a different kind of brown dye, like tea or walnut, I'd get a different kind of tide line color. So it took a really long time to get that right, the color that I had in my mind's eye.
And so let's see, we have a couple more. How many copies did you make of that book? They think it's very beautiful.
35.
No, yeah, that's okay. And then one person wanted to know about the perspective of that. Are we looking from the sky to the earth then in that perspective?
Oh yeah, let me see. Yeah, you're looking from the sky to the earth because you're seeing this as you would on a topographical map, these, as well as these. And then maybe your perspective is a little bit different here. Some people think it's like standing on the edge of the ocean or something. Yeah.
Wonderful. And was that your first book with natural dyes? When did you get interested in natural dyes in general?
Yeah, that was my first book with natural dyes. And so I got interested in it around 2016 when I started working with trying to dye paper. Okay.
Nice. I think I've got the questions for that one. Thanks everybody for the good questions.
So this is the white. Let's see. It's really hard to show, but I'll do my best. So that's the title there. So this is Abaca, but because it's waxed, it's basically transparent. So if I hadn't waxed it, it would look more like this, translucent. And I wanted this to be more like the image. So I didn't print any images because I thought the paper should kind of speak for itself. And then the second half of the book is completely waxed. So at the right angle or with the right light, you could technically read all the text. But it does work better to hold your hand under it when you're reading it. But as you lift the page, it becomes more visible. It kind of disappears when you set the page down.
There's some very nice questions about your process. Greta wants to know, what is the abaca waxed with?
This abaca is waxed with paraffin. I did try beeswax, but it made it a little more yellow, and I really wanted the white.
Great. And in addition to that, Jennifer was wondering, were you burnishing it to wax it?
No, I didn't burnish it. But if it gets dinged up or something, then I burnish it just with my finger, and it kind of melts the wax in that spot.
Nice. It looks like we have a fellow papermaker out there. Amy wants to know, how long was the abaca beaten for this book?
Oh, that's a tough one. So the beater that I used at the Morgan is not a standard beater, unfortunately. It's not Arena. So in that beater, it was beaten for 4.5 hours on the low setting.
Okay, thank you. I think the wax you used was paraffin. Yep, somebody got that. And somebody was just curious about that printing process on the paper.
Oh, that was letterpress printing.
Great. Was it on any certain style of press?
It was on SP15.
Okay, thanks.
This is algal fungal. Sorry, the sun has suddenly come in now, and it's kind of throwing off all the lighting. So this is the standard, and this is the deluxe. And the standard is bound in with a book cloth cover, and the deluxe is a paper case. And it has 3 prints on handmade paper. But the interior of the book isn't handmade paper, it's Hanamiel Biblio. There. So each section is separated by sort of an introducing spread, like a title spread almost, for the type of lichen. And I printed this off wood, which is the material that folios normally grows on. And that's the folios. And then this crustose is usually on rocks, so I printed this off a piece of polished granite. And then frutico is usually on or off wood. And I chose the color of the end sheets based on the kind of color you would get if you would dye using lichen, the most common type of lichen, but I didn't want to use lichen to dye a bunch of end sheets because you shouldn't really be tampering too much with that part of the ecology.
Nice. We have a couple of questions. Somebody is still thinking about the book you showed before and was curious, did you print the type first and then wax the paper, or wax the paper and then print the type?
Oh yeah, I did a lot of tests. So I printed the text first and then I waxed the paper. Yeah, and I did try doing it the other way, but the metal type kind of it bit into the wax, and that was interesting too, to have it bite in, but it was so subtle, a little too subtle. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge fan of subtlety, but it was a little too subtle. And if you so much as touched the text, it would melt away.
Yeah.
So good for another project where maybe talking about how things are disappearing or something, but not for this one.
And the paraffin application, I think everyone's in love. We have a couple other questions, but people want to know more about this waxing process. Did you brush it on, or could you talk more about it in general?
Yeah, I brushed it on. So it's just like ink. I mean, if you've heard people talk about encaustic, that's basically what it is. And you just have to have a hot surface, like a pancake griddle, and then a heated brush and heated paper and melted wax. So what I did for this one is I had a pancake griddle that I bought at the secondhand store, so not using it for food. And then you melt your wax in a container, like an aluminum tin can that you bake like tiny cakes in. And then an animal hairbrush. So you keep all three things. Don't keep your paper, but keep the wax and the brush on the griddle and let it warm up. You don't want it to fume, so don't put it at the highest setting. If it starts smoking, it's toxic. Keep your windows open. Keep your paper on the griddle and then dip and brush both sides. And you can get a really thick application. So I usually take a credit card and I swipe it across the paper to take off the excess. And then if it's too transparent and you want to get some of that opacity back, you can put it between two pieces of newsprint and iron. And it'll take away some of the wax and bring back some of the opacity.
Delightful. I think that helps answer a lot of those questions. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
And what type of fiber will be using for your latest botanical project? Will the paper be burnished?
Yeah, I'm going to be I'm not making the paper myself. I'm going to commission the Kagzis, the paper makers in India, to make it. And they make paper using raw hemp and a mixture of raw hemp and old manuscript pages. So they're going to make that. Yeah, and usually it's sized and burnished. But I did a bunch of tests on different types of paper that they make, and the best result was with unburnished and unsized paper.
Nice. And curiosity about presses. Did you move your SP15 to Norway, or were you fortunate to find one there? You told us a little bit about moving that press behind you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I didn't own any presses when I was in the States. I only bought a press when I was in Norway. We bought it from the UK. It was shipped over. And there's no Vandercooks here, or they're very expensive. So the more affordable presses are Corex or FAG. So this is the Corex. And this press, we wanted to move it. It's here now in the living room next to the kitchen, as you can see. And so this house is a converted barn, and so it's a little bit high up. And so we had to get a crane guy to come and pick up the press and take it over the roof of the house and put it on the other side of the house. So it was a bit nerve-wracking, but it just took him like a total of 10 minutes to do the entire operation. But I did think that it was just going to fall through the roof. But this is also not its permanent location. There's a smaller house across the yard that used to be my father-in-law's ceramic kiln. So we're going to turn that into a print studio.
Nice. Yeah, that 10 minutes can be the toughest 10 minutes ever. Everyone's in love with your work, by the way. Thank you for sharing. They're saying that Hans is saying he gets the impression that you do a lot of experimentation with techniques. Is that true? Do you like to experiment and try different techniques?
It depends. I'd never done linoleum reduction before I embarked on that book that I showed for my thesis. So the third print is actually the best print because I got better as I went. And then I really wasn't sure about wood engraving, so I tried wood engraving and I really enjoyed it. I took a class with Gaylord Shanlek. And so that's why I'm using this, because it can hold more detail, and I'm trying to get more detail. So in terms of like actual illustration technique, I feel like I'm limiting myself in a way. But I do like to make illustrations by cutting into things or cutting out of things, especially if I don't have access to a press. So the year where I didn't have access to a press, I did some works where I could just use cutouts or screen printing or something like that.
Yeah, using what's available and making it work.
Yeah.
A lot of us learn that, right? To that effect, actually, someone was curious if you have book artists that you like, that you're inspired by.
I mentioned Gaylord Chanlick, so yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with his work, just his image making really, and how he uses light, how he represents light, and that's like the difference between something seeming flat and something seeming dimensional. And his latest works are really inspiring as well. He's done this little book of flowers, I think, and a little book of birds, where he's used a multi-line engraver tool to make things look like they're out of focus, and the image that he wants you to see is in focus. And I just think that that's really good use of a tool that can be pretty limiting. So I really love his work. I also love the work of Jodie Williams, who lives in Minneapolis. She makes small, like miniature books. She used to do everything with etching, but now I think she does like one with etching and then reproduces digitally. And I also love Sarah Langworthy's work. I just like the quality. I like the pacing of her books and how she manages to like really engage the reader. So it's not a standard reading, and I like that aspect of her work.
I'm sharing some of those links over in the right. Looks like I misspelled Gaylord Channick's last name. I'll get that in a sec. That way everybody can look those up as well. So I'll share those last two artists in a minute. It's always fun to see new artists if they don't know them. There was a request to see the Atanima Botanica. Do you have that one with you there?
I don't, but I have a print from it that I can pull out. Just
Okay.
a second.
That sounds good, thanks. There in the chat are a couple more of those links to find those other artists.
Yeah, I was actually just putting together some ephemera for Codex. So I was using like off prints, but each of the ephemera has like one good movable print that may be incomplete. So I'm just going to look through the ephemera there. So that's the lotus. And this one is just, it's not stuck on yet. So it's just a little slightly thing. And then the second piece of it actually sits over this. It's a petal and it's cut at the base. Some of these ephemera have just this and some of them have just the petal. Let's see if I can find another one. Maybe. Oh yeah, there's the petal. It's hard to match the colors. I remember struggling with that. Even though I printed it the same day, something was just different about the paper, or yeah. This is an incomplete hibiscus. So this actually has three movable parts. So there's one, this one, and then something in the middle, and then this one would also flip up.
Thank you. I appreciate you pulling those out. No, that was great. That was really nice. In fact, there's a question to, are the flaps glued on or integrated into the paper? How are those connected?
Those are glued on. So I looked really carefully at those 16th century anatomical flap books. And at the back, they're glued on, but they also have like the entire thing might be backed with a thin cloth or a thin paper. So I just used, I didn't back the entire thing, but I just used a little bit of gozo and wheat starch and put them together. And then the book was bound as a drum leaf so that the backs wouldn't show.
Yeah, that's a really good way to do that. And also, I do want to say, after sharing those, we love Gaylord's work. He's come here and presented at Hamilton before, and he's A, such a sweet guy, and B, that stunning artist. And you, so yeah, so that's great. I was curious as to how you got into that.
Yeah, I took he came to Iowa to teach, and then he taught at Penland some years back, and I was assisting his class. And so I got to spend like a lot of time struggling along with my little block. But that little block with the lichen is what I printed and ended up printing at Penland. And he's the one that gave me the idea for that book, because I was lamenting to him about how difficult it has been for me to think of something new and creative while I have this job that's really draining my energy. And he said, well, why don't you just, why don't you just like expand this little thing that you have into like 3 different species? Maybe that's an idea. And I was like, oh yeah, maybe that's an idea. He made it sound so simple. It took like another year to get it done, actually.
Yeah, I know the simple idea that actually takes 6 months, like you were talking about with your animation. Do you mind, we've got just a little bit of time, do you mind talking a little bit about the book Print Artist Scholar of Color Collective, since that's how we were introduced to you?
Yeah, sure. So it's a collective. Now it's around 40 people, I think. It's been started by Tia Blassingame, who works at Scripps College. And it's for any book artist, print artist, or scholar working in this field of color. And basically, there's a website that showcases everybody's work, and there's a forum where we can kind of discuss things if someone is feeling really angsty about something or someone needs help with something. So both those kinds of things. And then Tia usually sends out a list of things that we can apply for every once in a while. And anybody can apply to join through the website. And recently, Tia did some fundraising to get together funds to support 5 artists to do residencies. And so I think she's planning to do more things like that. So I would follow Bookprint Collective on Instagram to stay updated with that information if you want to donate to things like that.
We have been introduced to a lot of new artists through it. So that's what I wanted to say is I was glad that like we have you here today, which thank you. And Tia was going to present and hopefully still is later in the year. So I'm really glad we've been introduced to the collective. So that's thank you. It's great.
Yeah, some great artists and many different kinds of artists too, not all like print or book artists. So it's been great. It's great exposure.
Yeah. And I noticed it's a good range of like academics as well as practitioners, and I really appreciate that. It's really nice to see a wide breadth. So
yeah.
So I am going to wrap up. I want to say, Radha, thank you so much. That was absolutely stunning and inspiring, not just to me, but to many of our individuals who have joined us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we do have some exciting news at Hamilton as well. One is that we can do these because of support of members. So Hamilton is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we love doing these events every week. And it is possible because of members. So if you are not a Hamilton member, we ask that you consider it. It's a really wonderful way to support the museum and to make sure things like this continue.